Please open your Bibles to Titus chapter 2. Titus chapter 2 will be there in just a moment. The Bible declares to us that a man who finds a wife obtains favor from the Lord. And that's as it should be. In Genesis chapter 2, remember that after God had created man, that he declared that it's not good for man to be alone, but he would make a helper comparable to him. And thus he made Eve, and he brought Eve to Adam, and the two were joined together to become one flesh. They were to be companions. Adam was to cling to his wife. And a wife then, of course, because of the nature of that relationship, would have a tremendous impact upon his life. A wife affects the work, the prosperity, the physical, the material well-being of the man. She has an impact on his relationships with other people beyond just the two of them. She has an impact on his standing in the community. And so the wife has great influence with a husband and is one, as he says here, that is a blessing to the man. Of course, granted that she is a godly woman. In Titus chapter 2, verses 4 and 5, it says that the older women are to admonish the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, homemakers, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. So the idea is that a wife is to conduct herself in such a way that she reflects well not only upon her husband, but it reflects well upon God. That she does not conduct herself in a way that it causes other people to blaspheme against God, to speak evil about God, because she claims to be a believer in God, a follower of the Lord. And so a man who finds a wife finds a good thing. That is how the Lord intended it. In Proverbs chapter 31, we see that this is a great illustration of that godly wife, of a worthy woman, if you will. And if you would turn over to Proverbs 31 now. Proverbs chapter 31. And we want to think about the fact that it extols a godly woman and her incredible worth. And as you read through this, you see that she is to be held in high esteem. And the emphasis is on the intrinsic value and great blessing that she is to her husband, to her children, and to others around her in life. She is a woman for other women to aspire to be, that they can look to her in what is written about her here and seek to improve themselves, to grow and to mature and to serve and to do well for the family and for the Lord's people. Now let's read Proverbs 31 verses 10 through 31 to get an overview of it. We'll talk a little bit about the overall poem here, and then we'll begin to break down individually these things that are written and discussed about her qualities and her characteristics. So Proverbs 31, verse 10. Who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. She is like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. She also rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. She considers a field and buys it. From her profits, she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. She perceives that her merchandise is good and her lamp does not go out by night. She stretches out her hands to the distaff and her hand holds to the spindle. She extends her hand to the poor. Yes, she reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. She makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies sashes for the merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing. But a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. When we think about this poem that is written here, it is what's called an acrostic chiasm. The idea of being an acrostic is that each verse begins with a successive letter in the Hebrew alphabet. Of course, not in the English alphabet, but in the Hebrew. A similar situation occurs over in Psalm 119. So it's considered to be an acrostic. In other words, this is highly skilled poetry that we have here. But then also it's called a chiasm. And the structure of this, I found it in the New American Commentary. And what a chiasm is a rhetorical or literary figure in which words, grammatical constructions, or concepts are repeated in reverse order in the same or modified form. For instance, this example is given by dictionary.com that says poetry is the record of the best and happiest moments of the happiest and best minds. So it echoes itself as you go through, and it reaches then a climax in the middle of that poem. So the center point of the poem is the main feature. In Proverbs 31, it is verse 23. That's the whole point and the purpose to what is written here. It's a poem that is directed to young men. The book of Proverbs, and we'll come back to this later, is directed to my son. And it is to instruct him in the kind of wife that he needs to search for and to take here in Proverbs 31. The New American Commentary also says that this woman is the kind of wife a man needs in order to be successful in life. It goes on to say that the man is Lord, that is the master of his home, and yet is dependent on her if he is to attain the status of a sage elder who commands respect in the gate. And so you see the beauty of this poem and how it's structured, and we get a good understanding of the meaning of that poem from the structure of the poem itself. Now let's understand that the poem, while it's directed at the young man, it can certainly be looked at by women to see a great example and to receive instruction of what it is to be a woman of virtue or a worthy woman. It is a practical manifestation of what's written earlier in the book of Proverbs, in Proverbs chapter 8, where it talks about wisdom and wisdom calling out to the young man. And she is presented there, wisdom is presented there as a female calling out to him. And so this is a practical manifestation of that wisdom in the life of a woman, and a counterpoint to the immoral woman that's talked about earlier in the book, as well as what's referenced a couple of times in the book about an angry and contentious wife. This is the opposite of that. And so we're going to read about that and study through this to see the qualities and characteristics that the Lord lays out of what a worthy woman would possess. So let's look now and break it down a little bit. In verses 10 to 14, one of the things we see here is how that a wife is invaluable. This kind of echoes what we read about over in 1 Peter chapter 3, in verse 1, where he says, "Wives likewise be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. For in this manner, in former times, the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are, if you do good, and not afraid with any terror. So when you look at this poem here in Proverbs 31, in verse 10, it's asking, who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. She is the kind of woman that God would have her to be, one who is good to the husband and a blessing to him, one who is a blessing to her children. She has a tremendous value. Now, it's interesting that this word here that is translated in the New King James, virtuous, in other translations, it's translated as excellent, which personally I think is an inferior translation for what is really being conveyed here, because the original word is also translated as army, or wealth, valor, and strength. So what is it that it's conveying, considering that she is virtuous, or describing her as virtuous? It's saying that the woman is solid, that she's stable. She is not flighty, if you will, that she is a force for good. Think about the army. Think about the strength. But then also, it says in verse 11, the heart of her husband safely trusts in her, so he will have no lack of gain. She's trustworthy and adds to the household. She doesn't diminish or detract from that household. When it says he'll have no lack of gain, that word for gain there is the idea of prey or booty, the spoils of war. So think about the virtue, like an army, taking spoils of war for the household. She is one who's a force for good that builds that household, that adds to that household like a conquering army, if you will. It says that she does him good in verse 12 and not evil all the days of her life. She does not undermine his work or authority. She doesn't tear down the home. She seeks what's in her husband's best interests. And it says in verse 13 that she does him good, or verse 13, she seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. So it is that she's mindful of the needs of the household. We need wool, we need flax, and so she seeks that out. She puts her hands to the work. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But then also in verse 14, she's like merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. One of the commentaries mention that carries with it the idea, at least in part, that she provides a variety of food. That it's not just the same old pot of beans day after day after day after day. She's mindful, let's have a variety here. So she brings her food from afar, various types of meals and flavors of meals, if you will. But then it says in verses 15 and 16 again, she rises while it is night, provides food for her household, and a portion for her maidservants. In other words, she gets up early to prepare for the day, and it's not that she is the one cooking the meals for all of her family, and she's the only one cooking the meals for the maidservants, that she's the cook of the household. Now, she's no doubt involved in it, as we see various examples down through here, but she's the one that makes sure that all gets done. She's overseeing, making sure that the house is taken care of and the day's chores are begun and being executed. Then also in verse 16, it says she considers a field and buys it. From her profits, she plants a vineyard. She makes wise use of the resources that she has within her control to provide for that household. She's intelligent and responsible in what is at her disposal. In 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 11, it gives an echo of this, if you will, where it says that you also aspire to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, and to work with your own hands as we commanded you. She's fulfilling this in her life, working with her hands, making sure that the things that need to be tended to are tended to, and they are being done. But then again, if we notice this, in verses 17 to 20, he says she girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. She's busy with work. And it says that she perceives that her merchandise is good and her lamp does not go out by night. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hand holds the spindle. She extends her hand to the poor. Yes, she reaches out her hands to the needy. So she's not only working and thinking about her home, she's very prudent in the things that she does, and she is compassionate toward others, mindful there are those who are in need. It says that she uses physical strength to get these things done. Verse 17, girds herself with strength, strengthens her arms. She's actually using her own body to do these things. So it's not that she's just sitting back and telling everybody else what to do, which she is, guiding those things, but she puts her hand to the work as well. And she values the merchandise, as it says there. She perceives her merchandise that it is good. In other words, she's not wasteful. She's not frivolous. She doesn't just give things away, though she does look after the poor, as we'll note again in a moment. And her husband doesn't have to worry about her spending habits. He doesn't have to be concerned, well, she's going to go and blow all the money that we have put back. She's going to think about it. She's going to be wise with it. She's going to be prudent in the spending and the care of the resources that we have. And it says she works after the sun goes down. Her lamp does not go out by night. That there's still things to do, and she's working at those things. Long hours of effort and toil. And she puts her hand to the work of making materials in verse 19. Particularly, it says that she stretches out her hands to the distaff, which is something we really don't understand about. But if you can see on the slide up here, there's the spindle and everything. That's just talking about making of clothing, making of garments, making of, as it says later, the idea of bedding. But she puts her hand to that. So she's working in these things and also puts her hand out to help others. She's concerned about people who lack. And so she's mindful of them and working to help provide for them. In Romans chapter 12, Romans 12 verses 10 and 11, it says, be kindly affectioned to one another with brotherly love and honor, giving preference to one another, not lagging in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Being affectionate, caring about other people, not just looking after yourself. That's a manifestation of it there in Proverbs 31, as it talks about her looking out for others and being diligent, not lagging in diligence. Well, she's not lagging in diligence. She's doing what the Lord would have her to do. And I reference these from the New Testament to show that these principles are found within the Word of God, really from start to finish. And here is a woman who is fulfilling that to honor and to please her Creator. In verse 21, then it says, she is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. She makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. You know, snow, inclement weather, the cold, is not an issue for her or her household because she's made sure everyone has proper clothing. She's looked out for that. They have the apparel they need to go out into this. And it's not an excuse to stop work. Oh, it's too cold today. I can't do the things that I normally know. You got to go do them. And she does them. It doesn't faze her. It doesn't affect her. And she's well prepared, and so is her household for these things. And notice that it says that she provides scarlet for her household. If you recall, scarlet was better clothing. So her household is not adorned in rags, but it's decent clothing. It's appropriate clothing would kind of be the idea there. And though she's hardworking, she's not frumpy and disheveled all the time. Verse 22, she makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Again, it looks nice. It's not ratty. And she's not ratty in her appearance. And the attention to her appearance is not from vanity, but it's from the sense of appropriateness and respect for others, for her husband, for her family, for the servants in the home, for the community that she is going out and interacting with. That's why she does it, not for her own pride and for people to praise her or puff her up. She's doing it out of respect. In verse 23 again, then, let's understand that all of this reflects on her husband and impacts his life and his standing. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. Others see and know of her diligence and the faithful discharge of her duties because they see her around town. They have interactions with her family, with her servants. And so they know the nature of this woman and how she lives day to day. And they see her husband as a wise, intelligent man because this is who he chose to be his wife. You're a smart man. You're a good man. You made a good decision here. She's a blessing to you and to your family. In verse 24 then, in verse 25, it says she makes linen garments and sells them and supplies sashes for the merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. So this is a section where it begins to echo what we've already looked at previously. She adds income as she can, as it talks there about supply sashes for the merchants. That's the idea. She's not doing that as a charitable activity. She's doing it as she makes these and sells them to the merchants. And so she adds some income, and it's aligned with her other duties. As she's at the spindle, she's making things for herself, for her household, for the bedding and things like that. She makes sashes, and she's able to sell those to the merchants. She clothes herself with strength and honor. She gives attention to her character, not just her clothing, is the idea. And when it says that she rejoices in time to come, the New American Standard says she smiles at the future. The ESV says she laughs at times to come. The idea is she has a positive outlook in the future because she is well prepared. And if there is trouble ahead, she just laughs at that because I'm ready for it. These difficulties, these troubles that overwhelm some people, that catch them off guard, that's not her because she's ready for that. And so she's prepared to face future challenges. Notice also in verse 26, it says she opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. She offers counsel to her husband, to her family, probably to her servants as well. She dispenses wisdom to them, but she does this with kindness. In Colossians 3, verse 12, it says, "Therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering." Having kindness toward others. You know, there are times when people do things that we know are not the wisest thing to do, not the smartest thing to do. And in dispensing wisdom, sometimes we can come across as hard. And maybe there are times when there is a rebuke needed, there's some sharpness needed in that. But as a general rule, here's a woman who dispenses wisdom, but it's with the law of kindness, as the New Testament teaches us to have kindness. In Colossians 4, verse 6, it says, "Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one." Be wise in dispensing wisdom. Be kind in dispensing that wisdom. The worthy woman does that. And notice also in verse 27, it says, she watches over the ways of her household, does not eat the bread of idleness. So it is that she's on top of things. She's looking out for the well-being of others, as it says that she watches over the ways of her household. She's observing things. She's taking note of things going on in the household so that things that need to be addressed can be addressed. People who need to be taken care of can be taken care of. She makes sure the house is running smoothly, is the idea. She's not a busybody. She's not eating that bread of idleness. And because of all of this, and the way that she conducts herself day to day, verse 28, her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. And so there is that praise that is naturally engendered within the family because of her character and her conduct among them, and the appreciation that they have for that. The family thinks well of her and honor her for those good qualities and characteristics in her life. And as those of us who are husbands and children, we need to be doing that with our wives and mothers, recognizing those good qualities and characteristics and showing that appreciation and giving that thanks for them. Then again, it says this in verse 30, charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. All of this that we've read about her and how she is rooted in this fact. She fears the Lord. The charm and the beauty only go so far. They only provide a certain benefit. And it says that those things are going away. But the woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. A woman who only has charm and beauty, but lacks a fear of the Lord, is not a worthy woman. That is not virtuous. But a woman who fears the Lord, whether she is in that time and place in life, having that beauty of youth, the youthful look and all those things, or it's a later time in life where some of that has gone away, that woman is a worthy woman, virtuous, to be praised and honored. The basis of her faithful discharge and duties with joy come because she loves and fears the Lord. In verse 31, it says that she benefits from her work. You know, one of the ideas of this is give of the fruit of her hands. It's the idea that there are times when she needs to sit back and relax and enjoy the fruit of her labors. It's not as though she's a 24/7 machine just getting after it all the time. And if she takes a break for a little while, that she's to be harassed and harangued and criticized. Why are you sitting around? Why are you doing? No, there's times when she needs to take a break and she needs to sit back and enjoy the things that she's worked hard to provide and to build in that home. And husbands and children need to allow for that. But there's another aspect to this, and that is the work that she's done is what she's going to get. She's done these things that the worthy woman does, and putting her hand to the work and having this wisdom and this law of kindness, and she's looking out for the poor, and she's making these items for the home and providing for meals and things like that. That is what she's going to experience. If she's not doing those things, she won't enjoy them. She'll be missing those things and lacking those things. Or if she's doing things like the proverb writer says earlier, that a woman who tears down her house, she's going to deal with that. She has to deal with those consequences. This woman here is building up her house, and she benefits from building up that house. Now, I think it goes without saying, as we have stated before, that a Christian woman is going to strive to be like this worthy woman. Take these qualities, these characteristics, and take them on board in her life. To focus on the inner versus the outer. Yes, there's attention that needs to be given to the appearance, as we said before. But the main thing, as Peter notes in 1 Peter chapter 3, is thinking about that meek and quiet spirit. That is of great value, and that is precious in the sight of God. And so a woman's going to do that. In 1 Peter 3, remember, he gave the example of Sarah. Holy women of old, this is how they conducted themselves. And Sarah specifically called out, saying that she obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. whose daughters you are, if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. So you think about Sarah and how she conducted herself relative to Abraham. And that quote specifically coming from the time when the visitors came to Abraham to tell him about Sodom and Gomorrah. And Sarah prepared a meal for those men who were there. And she was respectful toward Abraham, just even in her thoughts. Shall I give my Lord delight, bearing him a child? So there is an example for women to follow after. Think about Priscilla and how that she worked side by side with Aquila, working in Acts 18 in tent making, but then also at the end of Acts 18 in teaching Apollos the more perfect way of the Lord. So they were together both in their daily, if you will, physical labors, and they're together in their spiritual labors. A great example for women to follow after. But there's another one I want you to think about, and that is Peter's wife. You know, we don't read a lot about Peter's wife. We do know that he was married. In Matthew chapter 8, it talks about how Jesus went to Peter's house and his wife's mother lay sick with a fever and Jesus healed her. Well, Peter had a wife. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, it tells us that as Paul's discussing the idea of support of preachers, he says, 1 Corinthians 9, verse 5, do we have no right to take along a believing wife, as do also the other apostles, the brothers of the Lord, and Cephas? So Cephas being Peter. So he had a wife that traveled with him in his labors. Something else I want to point out about Peter in 1 Peter chapter 5 is the fact that Peter was an elder in a local congregation. 1 Peter 5, verse 1, the elders who are among you, I exhort, I who am a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. You think about him being an elder. That tells us something about his wife and about his family, how that they were faithful children serving God. So think about Peter now. Think about his wife. She supported him during his time with Jesus here on earth. And Jesus and Peter spent a lot of time together. And Peter went out and traveled and things like that with the Lord. Now they returned to Galilee. They spent a lot of time up in Galilee, which was Peter's home territory. But the idea is she was supportive of that and allowing Jesus and the others to come into the home. She was supportive of that. And then she was there for him when he failed. We don't have the details of it, but Peter's wife had to live through the fact that he denied the Lord and was distraught about that. He was upset. Now, again, we don't have the details, but just think about your life, your spouse, if you're married, how that going through a difficult time, they need encouragement, they need support, they need help. Peter's wife was there walking with him through that difficult time. But then going beyond that, as noted in 1 Corinthians 9, traveling about as an apostle, she was with him. At least part of the time she was with him. And so she was there for him during that time of going out and teaching and preaching. Now, what we read about Peter in the book of Acts, what do we know about him? He was the top target of those, or at least one of the top targets of those who hated Christians. He was prominent. He was under the gun, being arrested after James was beheaded, and they were going to kill him. Well, his wife lived through all of that. 1 Peter chapter 5, he's still married, right? He's an elder. Many years later, she's with him. And so she lived through all of that, dealing with those difficulties, the very real dangers, threats of death being brought against them. That was a strong woman. And dealing with Peter's personality, I don't know about you, but the impression I get, Peter was challenging at times. Was he not? With his boldness and he's ready to get after it. I'm sure his wife at times took a deep breath, but she's there with him. and she's there for him. Supported him in his work and role as an elder in a congregation as well. So you think about these women in the Bible who manifest those qualities and characteristics of the worthy woman, and how that women now can look to them to walk in their footsteps, to follow those examples. But we don't want to forget the whole point and the whole purpose of this poem about a worthy woman is for the son, for the young man who needs to be able to pick out a wife for himself. It closes this book out with an admonition and a vivid word picture of what a wife of wisdom looks like. He is to find a wife that manifests this, because she will aid and encourage him and inspire him to embody wisdom in his life. She's going to add to him and help to strengthen him. And when that happens, the wise man says, you will have success. Open to number 194. 194. You know, a virtuous wife is beyond question a blessing to her husband and her children. She will help to materially serve that family and to meet their earthly needs. Spiritually as well, she can strengthen and encourage their souls to be faithful and to serve the Lord. And that woman is to be praised and to be honored, to be supported and encouraged herself, for appreciation to be shown to her. Young men need to seek such a wife, and women need to aspire to be such a wife. So as you reflect on your life this morning, first of all, for the ladies, you look at yourself and compare yourself to what the Bible admonishes you to be. Are you being that? Is there room to grow? Are there some changes perhaps that you need to make? And for the men who are here, who are husbands, have you encouraged your wife in these things? Are you supportive of her? Do you show appreciation to her? Maybe there's some things you need to change and correct within the home. But as we all reflect on these things, understanding these great principles that range from diligent work to the fear of the Lord, do we have that in our life? Are we falling short? Or are we living up to what the Lord tells us we are to be? Do we respect him? And does that show itself in our lives? And if it's not, we're tangled up in sin. We become lackadaisical, apathetic toward serving the Lord. Let's make changes. Turn around. Renew our commitment to him. So if you're a child of God and you recognize you're falling short and you need the prayers of the saints, come and we will pray with you and we will pray for you, that you may be restored and strengthened and drawn back to the Lord. And if you're one who's never obeyed the gospel, you recognize this morning, I need to fear the Lord. I need to show the respect that he deserves and submit to his commandments, to believe Jesus is the Christ, to repent of my sins, to confess Christ before men, and to be baptized to have my sins washed away. If you're ready to do that, you recognize that need, we're here to assist you to accomplish that this morning. So if you need to respond, come while we stand and sing.